Welcome to FI News Review. I'm your host, Susan Choi. As the U.S. braces for what looks to be another record-breaking summer, it begs the question, how will that impact the food industry? To find out, let's bring in FI's reporter and producer and resident meteorologist, Brittany Borer. Brittany, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Susan. I'm glad to be here.
It is a pleasure having you. Let's get it started, Brittany. So last summer certainly was very hot. In fact, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reported that 2023 was the warmest year they've ever recorded. So what can we expect from this summer based on your findings?
Well, Susan, it is going to be another hot summer. So I've seen a lot this week. People have been talking about the Climate Prediction Center's seasonal temperature outlook through the summer. And I've got to say, there's a good chance that we'll be seeing warmer than normal temperatures. Now, this graphic here can be taken with a grain of salt. This is not a definitive forecast, but it is very likely that the areas shaded, especially in the dark orange, will be seeing above average temperatures. And not only above average temperatures, but we'll be seeing them for longer periods of time. If we look at the precipitation outlook, it looks like the East Coast will be wetter than normal, and the West, near the Rockies and toward the Pacific Northwest, it looks like they're going to have a lesser chance of seeing some precipitation. So that will ultimately, unfortunately, be exacerbating any drought conditions. If you look at the seasonal drought outlook, those areas in blue are, areas already in drought or expected to be in drought. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on, Susan.
All right, let's get into what's been in the headlines recently, the transition from El Nino to La Nina, which looks like it might coincide with the start of hurricane season. So given that transition, does that mean that there could be a greater chance of us seeing hurricanes entering into the U.S.?
Susan, the short answer is yes. There is a possibility that we could be seeing increased tropical cyclone activity this summer, in the end of the summer into the fall, as we see more of a La Nina pattern developing. We are coming out of an El Nino to a more neutral status right now as we are heading into the start of summer. But if we see that La Nina develop, which it is looking pretty likely that we will see, that is going to be conducive for more hurricanes and tropical cyclones in the Atlantic basin. So typically when we see a La Nina develop going into hurricane season, we can expect a greater frequency and intensity of tropical cyclones impacting the U.S., especially with the rise of temperatures in recent years. Hurricane Ian, for example, is still top of mind from September 2022, which was a La Nina year. That put a lot of pressure on the fruit and citrus industry in Florida. Orange production was on track to be low to begin with, but it ended up being the lowest production since World War II. Another example is Hurricane Ida in the Gulf of Mexico in 2021. That was also a La Nina year. That resulted in the disruption of 96% of domestic crude oil production and 94% of natural gas production in the US. This drove up prices, and that affects the food and beverage industry as well. So in reflecting on these examples, it's safe to say that food and beverage industry needs to be prepared for any ripples in their routine, from agriculture to manufacturing to distribution to retail.
And besides the impacts we know that weather will have on agriculture, what other potential impacts could we see weather affecting the food industry right now?
Do you want the good news or the bad news first?
Always good news.
We'll start with the good news. So the good news is that during a La Nina, we typically see upwelling in the Eastern Pacific Ocean along the west coast of the US, and that gives cooler and more nutrient-rich water to that area, and that attracts more fish. So fisheries will be doing well. That's one of the positives for a La Nina year. And on the other hand, we are expecting, like I said, an increase in both the intensity and frequency of storms, particularly tropical cyclones that may impact the US. I would say that food and beverage needs to be focused on logistics, from transportation to inventory management. So the question facing the food and beverage industry this year is not what if there is disruption in our logistics, but when it happens, what is our plan?
All right, FI's reporter and producer, Brittany Borer. Brittany, thanks again.
Thanks, Susan.
And you can check out all the great content that we've done by clicking on this playlist. Till next time, I'm Susan Choi. Take care.